So, good day, everyone, especially to our professor, Mr. Honorio. So, I will start presenting now. So, our topic is about intellectual disability. So, my group mates are Rubian Alindao, Mary Janine Mahinay, and yours truly, Justine Doran. So, what is intellectual disability? So, intellectual disability is significantly below average general intellectual and adaptive functioning manifested during the developmental period with significant delays in academic skills. So, intellectual disability were labeled before as idiot, imbecile, and Mongolism or Mongoloid. So, idiot is derived from the Greek language. It was used to classify people with severe intellectual disabilities. It referred to people who could not take care of themselves and required 24-hour care. The term gradually became mainstreamed. By the mid 1890s, its derogatory usage caused the medical community to discontinue its use. Next is imbecile. Imbecile is a French term. It is derived from a Latin word meaning without support. The term originally referred to someone who was physically weak. This term was used from the mid 16th century to the early 19th century. Imbecile was a medical term to classify people with moderate ID. Like the term idiot, it gradually entered the vernacular and became a term of abuse. So usually we can hear this idiot and imbecile as panungog or um, what do you call this? Panaway sa these special children, no? Especially the ID. And then we have Mongolism or Mongoloid. Was a medical term. It was used to identify someone with Down syndrome. For obvious reasons, the Mongolian People's Republic objected to its use. They requested that the medical community cease the use of this term. Their request was granted in the 1960s. The World Health Organization agreed that the term should no longer be being used within the medical community. And also, the term mongoloid was used now because children with intellectual disability looks like the people from Mongolia having slit eyes. So that one. And then, won't go next. Okay. So we have other terms. We have mental retardation, mentally challenged, and cognitive disabilities. So I'm sure you have heard of these other terms already. So perspective on intellectual disability, we have four. So first we have A, it's a complex condition that affects the manner by which a person is able to cope successfully with the demands of daily living at home, in school, in the community, and other environment. Nasad mo next. Ano yun? Siya mo next. Hindi na siya mo next. Hey, dara. B, a developmental disability. People with ID suffers from lags or delays in his or her general development profile. Next is um, results in substantial limitations in three or more of the major activities in life, like self care, receptive and expressive language, learning, mobility, self direction, capacity for independent living, and lastly, economic self sufficiency. And for the last one encompasses a heterogeneous group of people with varying needs, features, and life contexts. These are condition is accepted to be changeable, and some persons may manifest the condition at times and not at the other times based on their needs for various levels of support. So people with ID usually have limited communication skills, limited self-care needs skills, poor social skills, very limited academic skills, great difficulty with learning, requires special teaching methods to learn efficiently, and has below 70 IQ and limitations in adaptive behavior skills. So let's learn first these terms. I mean these abbreviations. AAIDD, or American Association on Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities, and SSI, or Supplemental Security Income. So we have these classifications of intellectual disability severity. So we have on this side we have mild, moderate, severe, and profound. So to let's go back to mild. So these are according to Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, four criteria. The second column. Then the third column is based on Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, fifth edition. And the fourth column is from American Association on Intellectual and Development Disabilities, or AAIDD. And then the last one is Supplementary Security Income, for SSI. So mild, the approximate IQ range is 50 to 69. Then according to DSM-5 criteria, can live independently with minimum levels of support. Then according to AAIDD criteria, intermittent support needed during transitions or periods of uncertainty. And then according to SSI listings criteria, IQ of 60 through 70 and a physical or other mental impairment imposing on additional, and naputol lagi siya. Naputol yun siya. Ah, gamyan lang yun ako. IQ of 60 through 70 and a physical or other mental impairment imposing an additional and significant limitation of function. The next, for moderate, approximate IQ range is 36 to 49. Then independent living may be achieved with moderate levels of support, such as those available in group homes. Then limited support needed in daily situations. A valid verbal performance or full scale of IQ of 59 or less. Now for severe, approximate IQ range 20 to 35, so it's going down. Requires daily assistance with self-care activities and safety supervision. Extensive support needed for daily activities. And for SSI criteria, a valid verbal performance or full-scale IQ of 59 or less. Then for profound, for the last classification, IQ is less than 20. It, it requires 24-hour care, then pervasive support needed for every aspect of daily routines, and a valid verbal performance or full scale IQ of 59 or less. So, what are the causes of intellectual disability? So, we have genetical and biological, we have environmental, and we have a psychological cause. So for genetical and biological, Knowledge of the role of genetics and chromosomal disorder has implications for prevention and treatment of intellectual disability, as well as genetics counseling for potential parents by Warren, 2002. Sorry, dugay kay mo next. So for environmental causes, it occurs prenatal, perinatal, and postnatal. Can cause result in biological or medical problems that affect the individual's growth, development, and functioning. And for psychosocial factors, may not always cause disability, but place an individual at risk for developing an intellectual disability. Then several psychological risk factors may exist and interact. And lastly, family poverty, homelessness, and inadequate parent skills are all potential social risks. So those are the causes. Next. And we also have behavioral risk factor may include parental substance abuse and child abuse or neglect. And educational risk factor may include lack of early intervention services. That's why intervention is very important. And lastly, the precise interaction of psychosocial factors with other factors that lead intellectual disability is not known. But the presence of both biological condition and one or more of these factors may result in intellectual disability. So to continue this, may I move on to Miss Ruby Ann Alindao for the next topic.
Okay, so it says that prevention is better than cure. So here are the preventions of intellectual disability. So we have here three. First, we have the primary prevention. So it uses strategies to prevent disease, condition, and or the disability. So it aims to eliminate factors leading to ID or intellectual disability or reducing its incidence. So, what are the examples of primary prevention? So, we have counseling and services for alcoholic mother prevents fatal alcohol syndrome. And also, we have childhood immunization. Second is the secondary prevention. So here, the aim here is early detection and intervention. So it uses strategies that prevent the development of symptoms of disability in individual with an existing diseases or condition. So example, um, close developmental monitoring of child with an older siblings with developmental disorder. So phenylketonuria can be identified and treated from birth. So the third one is the tertiary prevention. So here it aims to minimize the complications or sequel resulting from mental retardation or intellectual disability. So strategies to reduce outcomes of a disability on the individual's everyday functioning. So examples for this include, examples include strategies to reduce the effects of physical disabilities, educational intervention, and behavioral supports. So language development were major goals of this educational intervention. All children received nutritional services, pediatric care, and related benefits, including medical and social worker input. This was to ensure that the only major difference between the group was the intervention program itself. The result of the Caroline Abecedarian project indicated that prevention or poor intellectual outcomes through intensive, systematic early intervention combined with nutritional and health care was indeed possible. So here the teachers should be aware that the use of early intervention services can reduce or eliminate the need for special education services at school age. So now let's proceed to the characteristics of students with intellectual disability. So we have perhaps the most general distinguishing characteristics of students with intellectual disabilities is that they experience difficulties in learning due to deficits in intellectual functioning and adaptive behavior skills. So intellectual functioning involves many abilities, including acquiring new skills or knowledge, knowing how to use the various skills or knowledge in appropriate situations, and learning to use abstract thought and learning. So first, we have intellectual and academic characteristics. It includes attention, academics, memory, transfer and generalization, and also language. So first, let us talk about the attention characteristics. So students with intellectual disabilities have problems attending to tasks. May desire more personal feedback from other and therefore may pay more attention to people rather than task requirements. Direct training on all attention requirements or discrimination tasks can significantly improve the performance of the students with intellectual disability. Next, attending skills can improve through instructions. A variable such as motivations and interest in learning tasks can affect attention. So that is under the attention characteristics. Next is the academic characteristics. So students with intellectual disabilities tend to have reading, especially comprehension, and mathematical skills well below grade level. Students with mild intellectual disabilities perform well academically in inclusive educational settings, as in pull-out or resource settings, suggesting that academic skills can do improve in inclusive classrooms. So that is based on Cole, Waldron, and Mudge 2004. So next, we have the memory characteristics. Difficulties in memory do not appear to involve students' ability to remember for a long period of time once information committed to memory. Next, information moves into long-term memory only when there is sufficient exposure and repetition of storage in short-term memory. So example for this is remembering the name of a person without writing down generally requires the learner to name and repeat it several times, perhaps associating the name with the person's face. Next, students with intellectual disabilities have problems specifically in working memory. So what do you mean by that? Individuals' ability to hold information for usage for short period of time. Next memory characteristic is repeating the name several times while also looking at the person's face allows one store it in short-term memory so it can be used in conversation within the next minute. The next characteristic is long-term memory. Memory requires repeatedly using the name in association with the person's face, probably over a period of time, to be able to remember the name more or less permanently. Next, students with intellectual disabilities tend to perform and score more poorly on working memory tasks than their peers without disabilities. So that is according to Henry and McLean 2002. So for the next characteristics will be transfer and generalization characteristics. Students with intellectual disabilities tend to have deficits in the ability to transfer information, to apply learning to new yet similar situations, and to generalization or apply learning in different situations based on past learning. So example for this is a student might learn to use additions and subtraction with the calculators quite effectively in the classroom, yet still need additional instruction on how to use that skill while shopping in the community. So next is to ensure transfer and generalization. Different situations and settings must be incorporated in instruction. So that is based on Alberto and Troutman, 2013. Transfer and generalization problems lead to a need for supports in more environments or situations. So next characteristic, teaching toward generalization of skills may require use multiple strategies. So next characteristic is the language characteristics. So under this, many students with intellectual disabilities follow the same basic order language development as those students without intellectual disabilities. So example, students could experience delays in learning vocabulary or engaging adequately in the give and take conversation. Next, difficulties in memory may contribute to these problems, affecting the ability to some students to construct more complex verbal message. So that is according to Hesketh and Chapman, 1998. So example for this is a child may not adequately remember the events of 2 days ago to be able to tell others what was occurring at that time in the proper order and without omission of events. So next, about language characteristics. Various studies indicate the presence of significant speech problems in the students with intellectual disabilities, including articulation, voice, and fluency problems. So that is according to Taylor et al. The next characteristic is the social and personal characteristics. So the social and personal characteristics of students with intellectual disabilities often reflect their own expectation of themselves, which are frequently based on their past experience with failure or success. So that is according to Taylor et al., Thomas and Patton, 1998. So, example for this is a student with an intellectual disability who repeatedly fails in learning to read adequately may begin to believe he is unable to learn to read. So, as well as being to believe he is unable to learn in other areas. Conversely, a student who believes capable of reading may work very hard in learning the vocabulary and reading skills necessary to obtain and maintain a job. Next, expectation may be based to some extent on whether students are internally motivated and extrinsically motivated. Individual with intellectual disabilities may display more external orientation than peers by the age 8 years, and that external orientation as to who is in control of one's own life may significant change. Also, students with intellectual disabilities also suffer from poor self-images or self-concepts. Meaningful social relationship that are appropriate to individuals' psychological and chronological age are part of the social network comprised of family, friends, neighbors, and co-worker. The development of appropriate social behavior is a key to the acceptance of learners with intellectual disabilities by those who have no disabilities. Next, it should be emphasized that students with intellectual disabilities can and do make friends. Additionally, educating those without disabilities about their peers with intellectual disabilities can enhance acceptance and encourage development of social skills and relationship. So that is all about the social and personal characteristics. Let's move forward to the adaptive behavior characteristics. The students with intellectual disabilities have limitation in adaptive behavior skill. So that are the skills needed to function in different environments. Adaptive behavior skills group into conceptual or cognitive, social and practical abilities and can cover wide range of behavior and learning. So what are examples of adaptive behavior? We have interpersonal skills. So what do you mean by interpersonal skills? So these are the skills we use every day when we communicate and interact with other people, both individually and in groups. They include a wide range of skills, but particularly communication skills, such as listening and effective speaking. They also include the ability to control and manage your emotions. So that is interpersonal skills. Another example of adaptive behavior is the language skills. So language skills include listening, speaking, reading, and writing. Next example is the daily living skills. So daily living skills refers to a wide range of personal self-care activities across home, work, school, and community settings. Most daily living skills like food preparation and personal hygiene need to be performed on a regular basis to maintain a reasonable level of health and safety. So some activities of daily living skills include personal hygiene and grooming, dressing and undressing, meal preparation and feeding, mobility and toileting, housekeeping, laundry, home safety, health and medication management, leisure time, and creation. So another examples are safe environment and self-directed. The next slide is about the limitations in adaptive behavior skills. So what are those limitations? First is the acquisition deficit. So not know to perform a skills. Here, performance deficit meaning not knowing when to use the skills. The last one is the motivational circumstances affecting whether or not a skill is used. So that is all about the characteristics of students with intellectual disabilities. To to continue about the topic, may I call in Miss Mary Janine Mahinay?
Good day, Doc Honorio. To continue with our topic, Ms. Ruby Analinda will present my PowerPoint presentation. Alright, I'll start with the following myths about the adaptive skills of individual. But before that, what is myth? It is a traditional story, especially one concerning the early history of a people or explaining some natural or social phenomenon and typical involving supernatural beings or events. Next. Right, first myth is that they look and talk differently from everyone else. They are completely incompetent and dangerous. This one is very not true because they are innocent and they are gentle. They cannot do any complex task. Next, they don't support themselves or loved ones, and they cannot feel romantic love or have romantic relationship. They cannot acquire vocational and other skills needed to employ and live independently. Actually, these days, DepEd or some schools in Philippines already has transitional program for them to get work right after high school, live independently. And lastly is they are characterized only by limitation and possess no strength. Next is ID's general discussion of the characteristics of individual with intellectual disabilities tend to focus on knowledge and skills limitation with less emphasis on strength and abilities. The future teacher should be aware that strengths do exist in each individual, and most individuals with IDs are able to live, work, and function within the large society with support of their colleagues, most especially with the teachers. Teacher can support these strengths by creating a supportive learning environment because it develops motivation to learn rather than encourage learned helplessness. Next, please. How are students with intellectual disability identified? The major purpose of identifying individuals with ID is to provide them with appropriate education, related services, and support. Typically, many students with IDs, primarily those for whom a clear cause of their disability is not detectable or are not identified until school age as the diagnosis. And it requires administration of standardized tests that are not typically used on infants and toddlers. Right, intelligent testing, adaptive behavior skills assessment, and academic skills assessment. These are the common method used to identification. Right, multi-dimensional approach for identification and classification. These are the assessing health participation in the community. Next is the social interactions. And next is the attitudinal environment. Next is individual coping skills. And the fifth one is motivation. Sixth one is the learning styles. And last is the support needs skills. Alright, let's go to the diagnosis of intellectual disabilities is typically made when the individual's IQ is approximately 70 to 75 or below. Second one is the individual displays significant limitation in adaptive skills. And last is the age of onset is below 18 years. Assessment of their intelligence and their adaptive skills, competence. Logically, then identification of students suspected having ID is typically based on assessment of their intelligence and their adaptive skills competence. IDEA or Individual with Disability Education Act requires that educational performance can be adversely affected. Academic ability is also evaluated. And last is, it is just important to determine the first support a student might require to address his or her needs as well as to assess the impact of those support once provided. Next, please. Alright, let's go to levels and types of support needed can be determined by designing educational programs and supports. The example of response to intervention, students with great difficulty in literacy skills development could be provided with one-on-one assistance that includes regular assessment to evaluate whether his or her skills are increasing. Let's go to the intelligence test. General functioning can be measured by one or more individually administered and standardized tests of intelligence, although IQ should not be constructed as a permanent and unchanging measure, nor as an indicator of all facets of intelligence. Sanford Bennett Intelligence Scale 5th edition and which learned intelligence scales for children 4 are common test used. And last, each could be used depending on the age of individual to determine his or her IQ. Alright, let's go to adaptive behavior skills assessment. Measure the student's ability to perform skills needed for everyday life. The assessment measures such everyday skills like dressing, table manner, handling money, and telling time, among many others. Next is on 2013, AAIDD, or American Association on Intellectual and Development Disability, is scheduled to release the diagnostic adaptive behavior skills for use with individuals ages 4 to 21 years old. And fourth is the conceptual skills. Conceptual skills are skills that enable individual to identify, conceptualize, and solve interstate problems. Fifth is the social skills. Social skills is any competence facilitating interactions and communication with others where social rules and relations are created, communicated, and changed in verbal and nonverbal way. Six is the practical skills. It means skills performed by hand or with human intervention using equipment, tools, or technology requiring guidance, force, or movement. Directed observation of students' behavior may provide special use in comparing how he or she functional compared his or her peers. It is also important to remember that assessment of adaptive behavior does not equate to assessment of support needs. And adaptive behavior takes an ecological perspective on the individuals. And last is the assessment for personal competences, limitations, environments, and other interactions to support or hinder the individual functions. Let's go to support needs. Support needs first is identify the individual's significant desired life experiences and goals. Next is to determine the pattern and intensities of support needs through the use of the support scale, direct observation, structured view with the individual and family, and any other useful method. Third one is to develop an IEP that includes settings for activities that the individual engages in each week and supports needed to participate meaningfully in those activities. Next is to monitor progress in the individualized and support. And last is to evaluate whether the desired life goals and experiences have been achieved. Let's go to academic skills assessment. The student's academic skills are also evaluated to help determine whether he or she has IDs or intellectual disabilities. Specific academic areas such as reading and math can be evaluated using both norms and criterion reference testing, including curriculum-based assessment. Teachers commonly use direct observation and samples of students' actual work to assess academic skills. And the fourth one is eligible, or when all skills area assess, a multi-factor evaluation team of education personnel determine whether the student is eligible to receive a special education and related services. And general education teachers are frequently involved in initially bringing concerns to a study team that the student is not performing well in the class. Right. General education teacher may be involved in administering some assessments such as adaptive skills assessments or direct observation of behavior, and last one is skills during the identification process. So this is the end of our topic. Thank you so much for listening. So
So
that
that concludes our topic about intellectual disabilities. Once again, this is Justine Duran.
And this is Ruby Ann Alindao.
and this is Mary Janine Mahinay.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, classmates. Thank you, sir. Goodbye.